Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. We have some breaking news. Jamal Hill is injured. He has ruptured his Achilles tendon and will be vacating the light heavyweight title. He announced this on his YouTube channel. He said, look, I need surgery. I need rehab. The UFC has promised me a title shot upon my return. But now the light heavyweight championship is vacant yet again. And there's a couple different options that could be vacant light heavyweight title fights in the very near future. We're going to go through them all in this video in a little bit. And there's one that's absolutely shocking that I think a lot of people aren't even thinking of. But what an absolute debacle the light heavyweight division has been since Jon Jones relinquished the belt back in 2020. We are now working on our fifth light heavyweight champion. How crazy is that? Because you had Jan Blachowicz win the belt, beat Dominic Reyes in the vacant light heavyweight title fight, back in late 2020. Then he goes on to defeat Israel Adesanya, defend the belt once. Then he loses to Glover Teixeira. Then Glover Teixeira loses to Jiri Prochazka in a crazy fight. I mean, that fight was absolutely insanity. The UFC rebooks that rematch for later 2022. And then Jiri Prochazka, what was it, a week before the fight, 2 weeks before the fight, injured his shoulder, very serious injury, supposedly going to be out 9 months, a year. They didn't really know. We still don't really know. And the UFC's like, okay, we'll book Magomed Ankalaev versus Jan Blachowicz for the vacant light heavyweight title. They fight to a draw. So the UFC says, okay, on the next pay-per-view, we'll make Jamal Hill versus Glover Teixeira for the vacant light heavyweight title. Jamal Hill wins the belt at UFC 283 earlier this year, and we finally have a semblance of normalcy to the light heavyweight division. We're like, okay, Jamal Hill's waiting for Jiri Prochazka to return, and a lot of us have been anticipating that fight. That's a great matchup. And now we're pretty much waiting for the announcement. People are talking about maybe UFC 293, maybe 294. Sometime in the next couple months, we're going to get Jamal Hill fighting Jiri Prochazka. Jamal Hill ruptures his Achilles tendon. And right now, it's not 100% confirmed, but it's being reported that he ruptured it at an MMA Fighters basketball game when he was in Vegas for UFC 290, which just rubs salt in the wound. What a travesty this is. I mean, Jamal Hill versus Jiri Prochazka was such a compelling fight, and now it's not going to happen, and we don't even know. When is Jiri Prochazka even returning? We're not even sure. There was talk of him fighting in August, which never really came to fruition, and Jiri came out and said, I'm not going to be ready for August. And then there was some rumblings of maybe September, but we didn't even know, and now the fight's completely off the table. The light heavyweight division is just in absolute disrepair. And honestly, I can't get over the fact, I know there's some great fights to potentially be made. I can't get over the fact of how cursed the light heavyweight division has been. I mean, to have that draw back in December, I mean, what are the chances of that? And then on top of that, the guy who then wins the belt the following month never ends up defending it because he ends up getting injured and tearing his Achilles heel in a basketball game. Absolutely devastating news. Now, the only thing that's really up in the air right now that, really kind of holds this division up is what's going on with Jiri Prochazka. Because the no-brainer is, if Jiri Prochazka is planning to return in the next 2 to 3 months, you probably have to wait for Jiri Prochazka, and then you do a title fight with Jiri Prochazka, but we don't really have an update. The shoulder injury, when it was initially reported, it was reported as a terrible shoulder injury, and basically he could be out for a year. That's why he initially vacated the belt, and I guess that's why Jamal Hill's doing the same, because I looked it up. A ruptured Achilles can be anywhere from like 6 to 9 months of recovery. So we're not seeing Jamal Hill the rest of the year. We're maybe not even seeing him the first quarter of 2024, which, I mean, really sucks for Jamal Hill because he got basically an opportunity of a lifetime. He wasn't really in that title contention just yet. He was getting there. He gets to step in and fight Glover Teixeira because of that draw at UFC 282. He wins the belt. He ruptures his Achilles, but he's promised a title shot upon return. But you never know with the UFC. You never know what's actually going on. So now we just have basically an injury-riddled division because you look at the division right now. Jamal Hill, we don't know what's going on with him. We basically know, but we don't know when he's going to be back. Jiri Prochazka, we don't know what's going on with him. Magomed Ankalaev has been MIA since December when he fought to a draw against Jan Blachowicz. Jan Blachowicz is fighting Alex Pereira in the co-main event of UFC 291. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Alexander Rakic at number 4, coming off an injury, coming off a loss to Jan Blachowicz. Nikita Krylov could be in the mix. I know that sounds crazy. Nikita Krylov could be in the mix. We're going to go over all the possibilities here in a second. but he could be in the mix. He's on a 3-fight winning streak right now. And then you get down to Johnny Walker, which is really the last option of the entire top 15. And Johnny Walker is a viable option right now as well. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. The UFC is willing to give guys title shots off of losses. So you have to take into account, basically, the entire division comes down to who's not injured at this point, because Vacates is injured, Jiri's injured, Jamal Hill is injured. But there is one matchup. All these matchups that I'm going to give you would be very fun. I would really look forward to them. But there is a couple of them that are very, very compelling. And I think the most interesting of the bunch, but also the most unlikely to happen in the near future, would be Jiri Prochazka versus Israel Adesanya. How crazy would that be? I believe this was on my list of fights I want the UFC to make in 2023. I did a video in January, and this was one of those fights. Israel Adesanya wants to be a double champion. He went up and fought Jan Blachowicz. He lost. He got out-wrestled. Jiri Prochazka versus Israel Adesanya is a hardcore MMA fan's dream. Could you imagine if they made that? And the UFC has a big event coming up at UFC 293 in Australia. They've already said that Israel Adesanya will be headlining. There were some rumors, and it kind of looked like maybe if Jiri was ready, they would do Jiri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill on that very same card, that Israel Adesanya would defend his belt against potentially Dricus or Robert Whittaker, whoever won that fight. And this fight would be amazing. There's a possibility the UFC would do it because they have that new deal with the Australian government. They're going to want to bring a big card and a big fight. But I don't think the UFC is going to pass up on Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. I don't think they're going to make du Plessis sit out for a while. But maybe, just maybe, if du Plessis isn't ready, which I have a hard time believing, even if du Plessis was injured at UFC 290, I think he's taking the fight. But let's say he's not ready. Let's say he's banged up. He wants to be 100%. He doesn't want to fight at UFC 293. And Jiri Prochazka is ready to go. Don't put it past the UFC to make Jiri Prochazka versus Israel Adesanya. But honestly, gut feeling, I don't think that happens. I think the UFC makes Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. You have the whole backstory of them arguing about who breathes more African air and all that stuff, and everyone kind of hopping on the train of arguing about that, the dumbest storyline in MMA history. So if it's not that, what could it be? Well, the next most likely possible option, I think, is Jiri Prochazka versus Magomed Ankalaev. Magomed Ankalaev, a lot of people felt that he won that fight at UFC 282 against Jan Blachowicz, even though it was a draw. I was perfectly happy with a draw, the way you could score the fight. It could have easily been a draw. First 3 rounds to Jan Blachowicz, last 2 rounds to Magomed Ankalaev, with round 5 being a 10-8. So I thought a draw was perfectly warranted, but because of the way the fight ended, with Magomed Ankalaev dominating the 4th and 5th round, and some of the earlier rounds, I think it was the first round, could have went to Ankalaev. I think I even scored it for Ankalaev. Basically, people have said, Magomed Ankalaev is kind of, the top of the list of contenders. And Jiri Prochazka versus Magomed Ankalaev is a very, very compelling fight. They could do that fight in Abu Dhabi. That would be a massive fight for Jiri Prochazka's return. It could happen at UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi on the Islam Makhachev card. They could maybe do that as a co-main event, just because when they go to Abu Dhabi, again, they have a deal with the government. They want to bring a big card. The government's paying them millions of dollars. They're not worried about certain pay-per-view buys or, having too many big fights on it. Look at UFC 280 from last year. So there's a chance they do that. But again, this hinges on Jiri Prochazka. Does Jiri Prochazka, is he healthy enough to return? Because if Jiri Prochazka is not able to return, what are the other options? Essentially, you're left with a combination of Magomed Ankalaev, Nikita Krylov, and Johnny Walker. So you could do like Magomed Ankalaev versus Nikita Krylov. You could do Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker. I don't think the UFC is going to go with those options. I find those options hard to believe. But one option that I think a lot of people, it's going to kind of slip their mind a little bit, that I think is very, very possible and would be absolute insanity. But honestly, the more I start to think about it as I'm recording this video, I'm thinking, this is what the UFC may very well go with, especially if Jiri's not healthy. I think this is what the UFC goes with. UFC 291. Well, wait a second, Joey. That's only a couple weeks away. They could make Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira for the vacant light heavyweight title. I know that sounds crazy, but look what happened back at UFC 282. Look what happened. Jiri got injured. Jiri and Glover came off the card at UFC 282. They had a light heavyweight co-main event in Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev, and they were like, Well, we'll just put it on the line for the vacant belt right there. They fight to a draw, and they're like, okay, what's the next event? UFC 283 a month away? Let's do Jamal Hill versus Glover Teixeira for the title there. So the UFC has kind of made these rash decisions, especially with a vacant light heavyweight title. And I mean, who's going to object to that? If Jiri's not ready, who's going to object to that? I mean, I would love to see Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira for the light heavyweight title. And I know Alex Pereira is coming off a loss to Israel Adesanya, but still, he's a former champion. You know, he got caught and clipped and KO'd by Israel Adesanya, but he's moving up a weight class now. Jan Blachowicz is a former champion, and he's coming off that fight where it was a draw against Magomed Ankalaev. I thought maybe they would rebook that fight for maybe a #1 contender fight while Jamal Hill and Jiri Prochazka fought. So it kind of makes sense. So they could add essentially, I don't know what they would do in terms of, they have the BMF belt headlining that card. Ew. But they could move that light heavyweight title up and move that to the main event, maybe do Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje as co-main, or they could just leave it as it is and just put the title on the line. Nobody's going to complain. That's a great fight. That's an amazing fight. I'm really looking forward to that fight. I hate that Alex Pereira is coming in on a quick turnaround, but that may be the fight the UFC does. I honestly believe, if I had to put it in order, I want to say they wait for Jiri. I want to say they wait for Jiri and they do Jiri versus someone. It's going to be Jiri versus Magomed Ankalaev, Jiri versus Nikita Krylov, or Jiri versus Johnny Walker. I feel like the Magomed Ankalaev is the most likely for Jiri just because Magomed Ankalaev, his last fight was for the title. It came to a draw. A lot of people thought he won. But if Jiri is not ready, I'm willing to bet they're not going to do Magomed Ankalaev versus Nikita Krylov for a vacant belt. They're not going to do Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker for a vacant belt. They're not going to do Nikita Krylov versus Johnny Walker for a vacant belt. It's just not going to happen. So if Jiri is not ready, I think they do Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira. And what a storyline that is. That would be insanity. And for Alex Pereira, talk about getting fast-tracked yet again. I mean, he already got a big fight in Jan Blachowicz, a top contender. If he beats Jan Blachowicz, he was already next in line to get a title shot, arguably. And now it's kind of fallen into their laps because there's really not a lot of other options if Jiri is not healthy. And again, I know I said Jiri Prochazka, Israel Adesanya. I don't think the UFC is going to say, oh yeah, let's do that, instead of doing Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. That fight just makes a whole lot of sense right now. It's just perfect for the middleweight division. And also, are you going to ask Israel Adesanya, who's kind of been plotting to fight either du Plessis or Whitaker, all of a sudden now he's got to fight Jiri Prochazka? I think he would do it, but I just think that one's a little bit more out there. That one's a little bit more far-fetched. But if I had to nail down a prediction, I think we're going to get an announcement tomorrow. I think we're going to get an announcement tomorrow or Saturday. Better yet, we're going to get an announcement Saturday at the fights, this fight night card. They're going to elevate Alex Pereira versus Jan Blachowicz and make it for the vacant light heavyweight title. And if that fight happens, early prediction, I'm going Jan Blachowicz. I already told you guys, I think Alex Pereira is coming back far too soon. He just got flatline KO'd in mid-April by Israel Adesanya. Now he's moving up, fighting Jan Blachowicz, who has the legendary Polish power. And on top of that, dude is a leg kicking and leg checking machine. So Pereira's not going to have that advantage that he has over a lot of guys where he's just chopping legs. And also, Jan Blachowicz has the grappling in his back pocket. So Jan Blachowicz, even at his advanced age, it looked like at one point in time, oh, he's never going to be champion again. You look at that 5th round against Magomed Ankalaev, which was already unexpected that he was fighting for the title there. And you're like, oh, this guy's never going to be light heavyweight champion again. It's very possible UFC 291 features a light heavyweight title fight. I never thought I'd be saying that. But how devastating it is that we lost Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira too. I'm really devastated we never got to see that rematch. And now we potentially lost Jamal Hill, Jiri Prochazka forever. You never know what's bound to happen in the meantime while Jamal Hill is recovering and Yuri's potentially fighting because, I mean, look what happened to Dom Reyes. I mean, think about the fall off after John Jones beat him. You know, and a lot of people thought Dom Reyes won that fight. He is literally a dead corpse at this point. I mean, I don't even want to see him fight anymore because he's getting KO'd by jabs. So you never know. Jiri Prochazka, next thing you know, his chin could get exposed in his next fight. And we could never see Jamal Hill versus Jiri Prochazka. And that's a travesty for the light heavyweight division. But it is hard to believe that this will be the 5th champion since John Jones relinquished his belt. That is insanity because, let me make sure I'm right. You have originally Jan Blachowicz. Then you have Glover Teixeira, okay? Then Glover Teixeira loses to Jiri Prochazka. Jiri Prochazka then vacates, and Jamal Hill wins. So that's 4. So the next title fight will be a 5th light heavyweight champion since John Jones vacated the belt in 2020. It seems like the light heavyweight division is just playing hot potato. I'm wondering how this all plays out. Does Nikita Krylov or Johnny Walker sneak into a fight if maybe like Magomed Ankalaev is injured? Or, you know, I don't know. I think they're going to do the Pereira versus Blachowicz light heavyweight title fight. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.